You've never been inside your body, not once in your entire life. Right now, you believe you're sitting somewhere, occupying a physical space, looking out through two small windows called eyes. But that's the grandest illusion your brain has ever sold you. The truth is far stranger. You are nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, and the prison you call identity exists only because your neurons agreed to maintain the same lie every single second since birth. This isn't philosophy. This is neuroscience meeting its own limitations. Scientists can now prove that your sense of being located behind your eyes is nothing more than an electrical consensus, a temporary agreement between brain regions that can be shattered with a magnetic field, a surgical accident, or the simple act of falling asleep. What happens when that consensus breaks? People float above operating tables. Consciousness splits into two separate minds. The dying report journeys more real than anything they experienced while alive. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. The algorithm rewards channels when viewers stay engaged. And trust me, you'll want to see where this investigation leads. In the early 1960s, a patient sat in a medical chair with his brain exposed. Neurosurgeon Joseph Bogen had just performed something unprecedented. He'd severed the corpus callosum, the thick cable of 200 million nerve fibers connecting the brain's two hemispheres. The surgery stopped violent seizures that had plagued the man for years. But it created something far more bizarre. It created two separate people living in one skull. Roger Sperry, who would later win the Nobel Prize for this work, began testing these split-brain patients. The results shattered every assumption about the unified self. When researchers flashed an image to only the right hemisphere, patients couldn't name what they saw because speech lives in the left brain. But their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, could draw it perfectly. Two streams of consciousness, two decision makers, two separate identities sharing one body. One patient simultaneously drew a square with his left hand and a circle with his right, completely unaware of the contradiction. Another found his hands fighting each other. One hand would button his shirt while the other unbuttoned it. One reached for an object while the other pushed it away. His left brain, the speaking side, invented elaborate stories to explain actions initiated by the mute right hemisphere. The storytelling part of your brain doesn't need accurate information. It just needs a narrative that sounds convincing. These weren't brain-damaged individuals acting strangely. These were people with two fully functional conscious minds that had simply lost the ability to communicate with each other. The implications hit like a thunderbolt. If consciousness can be cleanly divided with a single cut, then the unified self you experience right now is optional. It's a construction. Your brain works tirelessly to create the impression of one continuous you. But that impression is more fragile than anyone suspected. The split brain studies revealed something even more unsettling. Your sense of being a single unified person depends entirely on constant communication between brain regions. Break those connections, and you don't disappear. You multiply. The question stops being whether you have a self and becomes how many selves are negotiating inside your skull right now without your awareness. This brings us to the most fundamental mystery. If you can be divided, relocated, or multiplied, where exactly are you in the first place? The answer lies in a thumb-sized region where your temporal and parietal lobes meet. Scientists call it the temporoparietal junction. This neural intersection creates what researchers call your body schema. the constantly updated map of where you exist in space. Every millisecond, this region receives torrents of information. Signals from your inner ear report balance and orientation. Your eyes feed visual data about your position relative to objects. Touch receptors across your skin map your physical boundaries. Proprioceptors in your muscles and joints track every limb's location. The temporoparietal junction synthesizes this flood into one coherent experience. You are here, inside this body, looking out at the world. But in 2002, Swiss neuroscientist Olaf Blanke accidentally discovered how to break that system. He was mapping brain regions in an epilepsy patient, preparing for surgery. He inserted an electrode into her temporoparietal junction and sent a mild electrical current through the tissue. The patient gasped. She reported floating near the ceiling, looking down at her own body on the hospital bed. She could see Blanke, the neuropsychologist, the engineer, everyone in the room from an impossible perspective. Blanke switched the current off. The patient immediately returned to her body. He turned it on again. She floated back to the ceiling. On and off, like flipping a light switch. He could reliably relocate her conscious experience outside her physical boundaries with just a few millivolts of electricity. The discovery was entirely accidental. Blanke had been testing that specific spot for completely different reasons, but chance had revealed something profound. The sense of being inside your body isn't a given. It's an achievement. Your brain constantly integrates multiple sensory streams to maintain that illusion. Disrupt the integration, and your sense of self can relocate entirely. What felt like the most fundamental aspect of existence, being here inside this flesh, turned out to be negotiable. Blanke later reflected on the deeper strangeness. The out-of-body experience isn't the mystery, he said. The in-body experience is the mystery. How does consciousness get so precisely anchored to one location? Between 5 and 10% of people will experience this phenomenon at least once in their lifetime, without any medical intervention. It happens during extreme fatigue, emotional shock, or those strange twilight moments between waking and sleeping. Millions of individuals across the planet suddenly find themselves floating above their bodies, watching themselves from outside, fully conscious but completely displaced. For most, it lasts only seconds. But those seconds rewrite everything they thought they knew about the relationship between mind and body. The temporoparietal junction doesn't work alone. It coordinates with other brain regions to maintain your embodied perspective. But sometimes, those systems receive contradictory information. During extreme stress, the brain prioritizes survival over accuracy. It might decide that your consciousness would be safer somewhere else, anywhere else. And in that moment of neural confusion, you experience separation. Yet Blanke's discovery raised more questions than it answered. If consciousness can be so easily relocated, what keeps it anchored under normal circumstances? And more troubling, if a few millivolts can move your awareness outside your skull, what other manipulations might be possible? Scientists in the 1980s had already stumbled onto part of that answer, though their methods were far less precise and their results far more controversial. Michael Persinger, a neuroscientist at Laurentian University, built what became known as the God helmet. It looked absurd, a modified motorcycle helmet fitted with electromagnetic coils. But when participants sat in his sensory deprivation chamber wearing this device, weak magnetic fields pulsing through their temporal lobes triggered profound experiences. Many reported sensing an invisible presence in the room. Some felt waves of inexplicable terror or overwhelming bliss. A few claimed they'd encountered divine beings and received messages from beyond. Persinger had discovered that the temporal lobes do more than process memory and emotion. They maintain the boundary between self and other. When electromagnetic fields disrupt their normal firing patterns, that boundary dissolves. The brain, sensing something has gone wrong, creates an explanation. Someone else must be here. The experience feels absolutely real because, from the brain's perspective, it is real. Your neurons are reporting a presence, and consciousness has no choice but to believe them. The consistency of these experiences across cultures and individuals suggested something deeper than random hallucination. People with more electrically sensitive temporal lobes reported spontaneous mystical encounters throughout their lives. They sensed presences in empty rooms, felt the approach of thunderstorms in their bones, experienced what religious traditions call divine contact. Brain scans revealed their temporal lobes fired more readily, creating a neural substrate for transcendent experience. But Persinger's work had a critical weakness. Other laboratories couldn't reliably reproduce his results. Some participants felt nothing. Others reported mild tingling or slight disorientation, but no profound encounters. Science demands reproducibility, and the God helmet delivered inconsistent results. Yet the core insight remained valid. The systems that maintain your sense of being a separate, bounded self can be disrupted. When they fracture, consciousness doesn't disappear, it transforms. Now drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were watching yourself from outside your body, even for just a moment during sleep or extreme stress? Share your experience below. These accounts matter because they reveal how common these phenomena actually are, far more widespread than neuroscience initially suspected. The neurochemistry of transcendence has a name: N,N-dimethyltryptamine, DMT, a molecule so structurally similar to serotonin that your brain can manufacture it using the same enzymes. Right now, trace amounts exist in your body, produced by mechanisms evolution embedded in your biology. Why would natural selection preserve the machinery for generating visions? That question haunts researchers who study this compound. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Rick Strassman conducted the first controlled DMT studies at the University of New Mexico. He injected volunteers with pharmaceutical-grade DMT and documented what happened. Participants described being catapulted into fully realized dimensions populated by intelligent entities. These weren't vague impressions or dreamlike fragments. They reported structured environments with geometric architecture, beings that communicated through color and mathematics, encounters that felt more real than baseline reality. The consistency across reports was striking. Independent participants described nearly identical entities: crystalline beings, self-transforming machine elves, insectoid intelligences operating incomprehensible technology. These entities seemed aware of the humans observing them. Some appeared welcoming, others seemed indifferent or even annoyed by the intrusion. Participants returned convinced they'd visited actual places and met actual beings, not hallucinations conjured by oxygen-starved neurons. What makes DMT different from other psychedelics is the conviction it generates. People who've experienced DMT breakthroughs often refuse to call them hallucinations. The word feels inadequate, even insulting, to the intensity and coherence of what they witnessed. Longtime meditators, scientists, atheists, people with no prior interest in mysticism, all return from DMT experiences fundamentally altered in their understanding of consciousness and reality. Brain imaging studies reveal why these experiences feel so convincing. Robin Carhart-Harris, a British psychopharmacologist, used fMRI to map brain activity during psychedelic states. he discovered that DMT doesn't simply increase neural activity, it reorganizes it entirely. The default mode network, the system responsible for maintaining your sense of being a separate self, goes quiet. Simultaneously, brain regions that normally stay isolated begin communicating. Visual cortices merge with auditory processing centers. Memory systems link to emotional centers. Logic dissolves into pure sensation. Areas responsible for filtering sensory input become overwhelmed, and the floodgates open. Information normally kept outside awareness rushes in. The brain explores configurations usually locked away by the need to maintain a coherent, survival-focused identity. When those constraints lift, consciousness reveals capacities that seem impossible under ordinary circumstances. But here's where it gets strange. In 2021, researcher Danny Gallagher conducted an experiment with DMT participants. Before their experiences, he showed them a laser interference pattern, a specific arrangement of light and shadow. Independently, without communication between subjects, several participants reported seeing identical scrolling symbols overlaid on the pattern. They called it the source code of reality, a visual language underlying physical existence. This shouldn't happen if DMT simply generates random hallucinations. Random processes don't produce identical complex symbols across multiple independent observers. Either the brain contains templates for these specific geometric forms, embedded so deeply that DMT reliably activates them, or participants accessed something external to their individual nervous systems. Both possibilities challenge materialist neuroscience in different ways. The question becomes whether psychedelics open perception to information already present but normally filtered out, or whether they create convincing illusions of meaning where none exists. Current neuroscience leans toward the latter. DMT floods serotonin 2A receptors in regions that gate perception. These receptors normally screen excess information, keeping you focused on survival-relevant data. Overwhelm them, and the filters collapse. You perceive more. The skeptical answer seems obvious. Brains are similar across the species. They have common structures, shared chemistry, universal patterns of activity. Naturally, they would generate similar experiences when pushed into extreme states. The mystical experiences of a Tibetan monk, an Amazonian shaman, and a modern neuroscience volunteer receiving DMT might arise from the same neural mechanisms, culture merely providing the interpretive framework. But that explanation struggles with verified perceptions during extreme states. This brings us to the strangest category of consciousness research: near-death experiences. Accounts where people report profound awareness during periods of clinical death, when brain activity has ceased entirely, according to available monitoring technology. The most famous case belongs to Pam Reynolds. In 1991, she underwent a procedure called hypothermic cardiac arrest at Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix. Surgeons needed to repair a massive aneurysm deep in her brain, positioned where any conventional surgery would be fatal. The solution was radical. They would drain all blood from her brain, cool her body temperature to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and stop her heart completely. By every medical definition, Pam Reynolds would be dead during the operation. Dr. Robert Spetzler led the surgical team. They taped Pam's eyes shut. Molded speakers covered her ears, playing loud clicking sounds to monitor brainstem activity. EEG sensors tracked her brainwaves. As the procedure began, her brain activity flatlined. Her body temperature dropped so low that cellular metabolism essentially stopped. No blood flowed to her brain. She should have experienced nothing, a gap in consciousness from anesthesia to awakening. Instead, Pam Reynolds reported watching the entire surgery from a position above the operating table. She described the bone saw they used to open her skull. "It looked like an electric toothbrush," she said, not the large circular saw she'd expected. She heard conversations between surgical staff, specific comments about her blood vessels. She described instruments she'd never seen before, technical equipment that wasn't visible when she entered the operating room, because everything was still covered and packaged. Most remarkably, she reported the moment surgeons discovered her femoral artery was too small for the planned procedure. This discovery happened while her brain was completely flatlined, during the period when EEG showed zero electrical activity. Dr. Spetzler later testified that the details she reported weren't available to her through normal sensory channels. The surgical instruments were inside sterile packages. Conversations happened after she was fully anesthetized. Her eyes were taped shut, her ears blocked by speakers playing continuous clicking sounds. How did Pam Reynolds perceive accurate details about events that occurred while her brain showed no measurable activity? Skeptics propose several explanations. Perhaps brief moments of consciousness occurred that monitoring equipment didn't detect. Maybe she reconstructed memories from fragments heard before or after the surgery. Her brain could have filled in plausible details based on expectations and later conversations with medical staff. Yet Dr. Spetzler himself found these explanations inadequate given the specificity and accuracy of her account. Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted the largest prospective study of near-death experiences, following 344 cardiac arrest survivors. 18% reported profound experiences during their clinical death. They described leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels of light, encountering deceased relatives or beings of overwhelming love, and receiving knowledge about existence that transformed their understanding of reality. The consistency across cultures stunned researchers. The same tunnels, the same beings of light, the same sense of absolute peace and returning with insights too vast for language. But most compelling were the verified perceptions. Patients accurately described medical procedures, conversations, even events in other rooms while they were clinically dead. Some returned speaking languages they'd never learned. Others demonstrated knowledge of complex topics they couldn't have possessed before their cardiac arrest. Anita Moorjani's case pushes these boundaries further. Dying of lymphoma in a Hong Kong hospital, her organs failing one by one, she reported entering a space of infinite love and understanding. In this state, she claimed to receive knowledge that her cancer would completely vanish if she chose to return to her body. Her doctors expected her death within hours. The cancer was too advanced, too aggressive. No known treatment could reverse her condition at that stage. Yet her tumors began shrinking almost immediately after she regained consciousness. Within weeks, they had disappeared entirely. Her medical team documented the recovery, but couldn't explain it. The cancer had metastasized throughout her body. The reversal defied every medical expectation. Moorjani attributed her healing to the understanding she received during her near-death state, a conviction that she was loved absolutely and her body would respond to that realization. Materialist neuroscience offers explanations. DMT flooding the dying brain creates vivid final hallucinations. Temporal lobe seizures during oxygen deprivation generate mystical sensations. The brain, shutting down, produces a cascade of neurochemical events that feel meaningful but signify nothing beyond cellular death. Yet this framework struggles with verified perceptions. How does a brain with no measurable activity process visual information? Why do these supposed hallucinations contain accurate details about events the person couldn't have witnessed? Some researchers propose a radical alternative. Consciousness might be fundamental to the universe, woven into reality like gravity or electromagnetism. In this view, brains don't create consciousness, they focus and organize it. They're receivers, not generators. When the brain fails, consciousness doesn't disappear. It simply loses its organizing structure, expanding beyond the boundaries we normally experience. The you watching this video might be far more expansive than any story your neurons construct. Right now, your brain is maintaining an intricate illusion. It's convincing you that you're located somewhere specific, that you're experiencing reality as it actually is. But we've seen how fragile that construction becomes. A few millivolts of electricity can relocate your awareness outside your body. A surgical cut can split you into two separate minds. The dying report expansions of consciousness that seem impossible according to everything neuroscience understands. If you've made it this far, drop a comment with the phrase, "I am nowhere." Let's see how many people completed this journey into the deepest mystery of existence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. These investigations go places most channels won't touch, and you'll want to see what we explore next. Another video is appearing on your screen right now. Click it and keep going. The rabbit hole goes much deeper than what we covered today, and the next piece of the puzzle might be exactly what you need to hear. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.